Welcome to the GEOTOP-A lecture. Today's lecture will be given by Ingrid Soli, who will tell us about spaces of discrete vector fields and their applications to complex systems dynamics. Take it away, Ingrid.
Hi, thank you. So I would like to thank the organizers of the seminar for inviting me. It's just my pleasure to speak about my work, the work that I've been doing in the past possibly 3 years and a half. So part of this is of the work that I'm going to present is in collaboration with several people in mathematicians, applied mathematicians, and physicists, and yeah. So it's been a very interdisciplinary project, and it's been quite fun. And so I would like to then talk about these spaces of discrete vector fields and how we can apply to study complex systems dynamics. So the plan for this talk is that I will start saying some words about what complex systems are, so that then I will kind of motivate the idea of studying spaces of discrete vector fields to understand or to try to study complex systems dynamics. And in the third part, I will say some applications. I will talk about some applications, direct applications to modeling these complex systems with simulations and some experimental results. So this idea of studying complex systems basically started from the fact that when I started in this project involved in the University of Southampton, I realized that there were many connections between the different systems or physical systems I was interested in and the dynamical properties that they presented. So then I realized that some of these systems light on a more like a bigger group, which is called, or it goes by the name of complex system. So the idea then is that I would like to say something about how we can these properties of the complex system might be repeated in some cases, so that we can construct a general framework that might be applicable to study a variety of complex systems. So what are complex systems? So perhaps there is no unique definition of what a complex system is. However, in the definitions that we might find in literature, we will see that in general, the complex systems will be formed by many interacting entities or components that as a whole will produce a behavior which is not going to be easily predictable from the properties of these entities. So complex systems will arise in a variety of fields, which might include, for example, physics, biology, economics, engineering. And in general, all these systems, because they are formed by many particles, interacting, they present properties which are challenging to model, such as, for example, nonlinearity. They might also exhibit self-organization, feedback loops, adaptation, among other properties. Typical examples of these complex systems are the Earth's global climate, the human brain, the economy, organisms, living systems, communication systems as well. And we might think of a complex system as something lying between the chaos and something which is ordered. So somehow this is kind of the challenge of studying or modeling complex system, is that they might lie in between, so that we might see them, they might present chaotic behavior, but at some also they might present some kind of ordering or idea of order in their behavior. So let me then just say or present some examples of these complex systems with a little bit more detail. So let's start, for example, with the organisms. So I guess that one of the very, very first approaches or approach to the study of organisms, or like how these organisms are formed, one of the simplest models perhaps is the one that was introduced by Turing. So he basically has a paper called about morphogenesis. Basically, it's a process in which in nature that makes that an organism to have to acquire its shape. So the idea of Turing is quite simple, but it's really, really nice, and it's been very applicable in many situations. And still, there is a lot of work around this model of introduced by Turing. And the idea here is that basically we can think of an organism as formed by the kind of blocks that form the organisms are kind of chemical reactions. So in the simplest case, we will have, say, two types of chemical components, which, for example, here we have A and B. And they will interact. So A, for example, will start reacting to give rise to the chemical compound B. But as soon as the compound B starts forming, it starts decomposing again back to A, or changing again back to A. And this somehow, there is some here time dependency in this kind of reaction, where this constants Ka and Kb have to do with how quickly the reaction in one direction and the reaction in the other direction take place. So the way to model, for example, introduced by Turing, is that basically if we put these two compounds in a domain, these two chemical species in a domain like this one, like this square, then the interaction will depend on the diffusion, or how quickly how the concentration of a molecule A or the compound A and B change in each point of our domain will depend on the diffusion of the constants K and some other parameters. So basically, in this case, we have many molecules, all of them interacting in a certain way, and this interaction will be dependent on all these equations. And the end result that we can see is, for example, in the simplest model, is this very nice dots, red dots in here, surrounded by other colors. And what we see in the real life is, for example, some shapes which have, for example, certain pattern in, animals having patterns in their skin. And this is basically a very, very nice way in which we can, a first approach to complex systems in which just molecules that randomly start kind of interacting, then give rise to a very, the shape of an organism and presenting different kind of patterns. So this is kind of an idea of how somehow disorder in which we can think of just molecules moving randomly give rise to something much more ordered. Another example of a complex system is the Earth's climate, where we have here, for example, the Earth, which we can think of it as like a ball, a three-dimensional ball or sphere, where we have at each point, basically, we might have different type of variables which will affect how the weather or the climate on the Earth behaves. And so in this case, we one of the very first ways to realize that maybe it's not that easy to understand or to model this climate is by using these equations of Lorentz, where we already maybe some of the first examples in differential equations that we perhaps saw in our undergrad studies, where if we wanted to model the weather, then we will realize that we might have some chaotic attractor appearing there, which makes things complicated to forecast. And however, despite of these complications, people still are kind of able to give predictions about the weather. And the way to do that is that basically lots of data are captured or are recorded at different points on Earth. So for example, in here, I'm just like presenting in this map some of the points where the satellites or certain monitoring systems used to obtain information about the weather, like temperature conditions, pressure, humidity, I don't know, lots of factors that will be affecting the weather or the climate of the Earth. So in general, again, we can think of this as each point on the Earth somehow will carry information that in some sense, like in the end, will give rise to this global behavior of the climate on the Earth. But this behavior also might be a bit chaotic. So chaos, as I mentioned, is some of the perhaps characteristics of these complex systems. So these are kind of the two typical examples of a complex system. So my idea then is how is that we can model. So the idea of this project is that when I started studying this, so I realized that somehow this idea of each point on carrying information about the concentration in a domain on the plane might be similar to this idea of each point on the Earth might carry information about, for example, temperature, pressure, and so on for the Earth that give rise to this behavior, global behavior. So somehow then obviously, when we start studying complex systems, we realize that the data that we need to analyze to understand these complex systems also becomes complicated in some sense. So, for example, we instead of having just spreadsheets with lots of rows and features, we might have other types of structures like images, where we have, for example, arrays, as people call in three-dimensional arrays, as people call in computer science, for images. We might have time series. We might have graphs where we have edges and vertices. We might have also molecular graphs if we want to describe, for example, DNA or proteins. We might have not just a graph, but each of the vertices will represent a particular, for example, element or atom. And so this is kind of also something that arises in the complex system, the fact that we have more complex data. However, one of the things which is very common in all these complex systems is that each of these entities that form a complex system will carry a certain information. Yeah, so they will carry information on its own that will contribute to a global behavior of the system. So this kind of like made me thought of some of the things in maths that we use. For example, the fact that we might have like vector fields, an idea of having a topological space, and at each point we might have vectors, and somehow make this analog in this case in which we might have something like more general than a topological space, like a set, for example, and all these elements on a set, for example, might carry this information. So my idea then is that, or our idea was that we wanted to then think about a data point as a set, a data point for a complex system in a given time. Yeah, we might think of as a set where each element of the set carries information on its own, and this might be thought of as a representation of a particular state of this complex system in something bigger, which is called the configuration space. So this is a very some words that people use in dynamical systems. So we would like to see how the system evolves in some more like abstract space called the configuration space of the system. So in that space is where we kind of try to look or understand how the trajectories, the attractors that a system might present. So now for a given complex system, then is the set of vector fields over certain kind of sets or spaces might give us a representation of a configuration space, and all the elements in there will be states that can be thought of as a vector field over a space. So now with this idea in mind, so this is kind of the ideas I started working or like understanding in terms of to kind of put together all these the properties that the complex system present, and then I realized that we might exploit the idea of spaces of vector fields, the geometry of vector fields, to understand this complex system dynamics. If not, then let me move then to the spaces of discrete vector fields, which is basically a way in which I would like to model somehow an abstract configuration space of a dynamical system. So in order to introduce these spaces of vector fields, I need to then define these discrete measure spaces. So let's start then with a countable set. And here Pm will be the power set regarded as a sigma algebra. And so a measure on this set will be just a function from the power set of M to the positive reals union the infinity, which will satisfy the following properties. So for any set in the power set, and for all the elements in A, the measure of a singleton will be finite. And also the measure of any set A in the power set will be the sum of all the measures of the singletons A that live in big A. So a discrete measure space then is just a countable set along with a measure. And we will say that if M is finite, we said that the set M along with the measure is a finite measure space. So examples, I'm just here presenting some examples that might be useful for later. We might have, for instance, this rectangle and this grid, and where here the set will be just defined as all the squares in this grid. And the measure that I give to every element S on the big S, little s in big S, is equal to 1, which is basically this idea of the kind of area. So in this case, this is a very regular grid, and then this will be just 1 for simplicity. Also, we might have a set, another example of a discrete measure space would be the set of all the triangles in a triangulation of a sphere. And here, the measure of every triangle will be just its area. Or we also might have the Voronoi tessellation on this domain. And in this case, all the set or the measure space will be the set of all the cells, and the measure of each cell will be the area of the cell. So these are very simple examples. And now I want to define again. So this is kind of the idea. So these elements in this set will kind of model these entities in a complex system. Now I would like to define then how is that these elements carry this information of the complex system. So here now we given a finite measure space. A discrete vector field over M is just a map from M into some vector space Vi. And then given a vector field over M, we will define the LPQ norm of this vector field that we denote in this way by this expression, where here x brackets s will represent just the value, or well, the vector at the point s at the point s. And here is just the measure of the point s. So the measure of the singleton s. So I take the sum of all these over all these elements s in the measure space, and then I take, well, here is I take the Q norm in this part, and then I take 1 over p to the exponent 1 over p. And this is another definition if p is finite, and if not, then we have this other definition. So with this, I want to say that somehow we already, this is some kind of generalization of the usual like LPQ spaces, and that we can define in analysis. But in here, obviously, we are just introducing this idea of these measure spaces, finite measure spaces. And here we have as examples, just focus on this idea of studying complex systems. We have two images, so they will represent two different discrete vector fields, where here my image, I might think of the intensity of the pixel as just this arrow, where this will be three-dimensional, say, where each entry, each coordinate will represent the intensity in the channel R, G, or B. And so if I have two different images, I will have basically the same two different discrete vector fields. Another example, it could be like in the case of the Earth. So if I, for example, have a triangulation of the Earth, where each of the points, the center of each of the triangles lie in one of these points that people use to monitor the weather, then all this condition of temperature, pressure, and so on will be described as an arrow in here, and so in as a whole, this will define a discrete vector field. So if I have, for example, two different measurements of the weather at two different times on the day, then this will define two discrete vector spaces. Sorry, vector fields. Okay, so now the set of discrete vector fields then can be endowed with distances, and this is useful in the sense that in order to understand, for example, how the dynamical behavior of my system, so I want to compare, obviously, the similarities between two different states of my system. So the fact that the two states are different, in this case, each of the vector fields will define the state of my system in its configuration space. And measuring the similarity will be the same as saying how my system is moving in this configuration space. Yeah. So here I would like to then find this similarity in terms of a distance, and then these spaces of discrete vector fields then will allow me to do that. So we have these distances defined in this way. So basically, given two vector fields, I will take the norm, the LPQ norm of the difference between these two vector fields, which is can be written in this way. And then we will have, if P and Q are equal to 2, then this L22 norm and L22 distance can be described in terms of an inner product. So examples then of these, these computations, just a very, very easy examples. We have, for example, 4 images that I obtain by doing some kind of like a plots in in MATLAB, and I change some parameters, and I have different pictures that, when I put all them together, give us this idea of movement on this, these points are start looking as if they were moving. And when I compare these images using some of these distances, for example, here I'm taking the L22 distance, then what I see is that then here the color mapping here is just the represent the distance between images. So here I think there were around 100 pictures, and this is a distance matrix of 100 by 100. And what I can see, for example, just looking at this distance matrix, is that the blue part, or the blue color, means that the difference between two systems is almost zero, or zero in this case. If it is deep blue, they are very close to each other, and if it is very red, they are very far from each other. So that means that, for example, say a system which might be 10 will be very close to something about, I don't know, 90. So that means that this system, or in here, so somehow the fact that at these points this is very blue means that the system, and when I kind of draw a line, a parallel line, a horizontal line, the fact that I have repetition of color means that the system is kind of evolving in a way that is returning to some state, given a state t. So somehow it's kind of moving in a kind of a loop in its configuration space. So this is something that it's already kind of can be seen through just looking at these distance matrices. So we can also do this with the gradient of an RGB image. So these were RGB images, and then I can take the gradient and do the same thing with that, and then we have a similar kind of behavior. Now we also can do the same with with a simplicial complex. So what we did was that we obtained the triangulation of a sphere. Then we define a function over a scalar function, in this case, over a simplicial complex. And then we also obtain the distance matrices, and also locally, we were able to obtain gradients of these scalar functions. And this is what we obtained. So somehow this is kind of like the examples of how the things that we might see using this approximation, these measurements of distances between different discrete vector fields. Now, another thing that we can do with this is that, in general, as I said, because an image or our discrete vector field will contain as many elements. In the case of the images, the measure space will have as many elements as pixels, for example, we have in here. So which might be huge, right? And also similarly in the triangulation, we will have as many entities in forming our complex system as triangles we have in here. So this might grow really fast, and then the problem that we have is that it might be high dimensional. However, because of this idea of lying in between chaos and order, we have the hope that our problem then can be reduced to some low dimensional representation. So we can understand or study the system with a low dimensional approximation. So in order to do that, then we use this idea of embedding our distance matrix into a Euclidean space. And then with this embedding, we can kind of this embedding will be done in a way that the distortion between our original metric space, which is the space of vector fields, is a little bit distorted, not too much, not very distorted. And then we will try to kind of recover try to obtain a collection of vector fields from a distance matrix that allow us to kind of approximate our original states. So I just want to mention in here that, for example, what we are going to obtain from this algorithm is a set of eigenvalues and eigenvectors from this embedding from the distance matrix into a Euclidean space. So this will return the classical multidimensional scale will return a set of eigenvalues and eigenvectors that we can use to kind of describe our original vector fields. So we can approximate, say, in this case, our images or our vector fields over a simplicial complex by using just some of the eigenfunctions or eigenvectors from this distance matrix. So, for example, in here, I am kind of trying to, for this example of the plotting this these images, or well, having these images using MATLAB, we obtain these pictures, and this is in grayscale. And we here, from the embedding of the distance matrix that I showed before, what we have here is this will be the eigen functions, and this will be the eigenvalues associated to these embeddings. And the eigenvalues will, the higher the eigenvalues, will be the ones that will allow us to approximate our system. So somehow, these are called the principal coordinates of the system, meaning that those which are very big will be kind of the number of big values, big eigenvalues, will allow us to determine what is the low dimensional approximation that we can do for our system. So, for example, in this case, these two eigenvalues are very big compared to these ones. So then we might approximate this system that was made of I don't know how many pixels to just something that has dimension 2. Yeah, so the dynamics, instead of living in some configuration space which is, I don't know, very big number of dimensions, we might approximate just to something that has dimension 2. So doing that, and here, well, this is a plot of the, say, eigenfunctions or eigenmodes, as people call. And somehow from here we can see that the system, it's an oscillating system, right? So here we will see how these eigenfunctions are like a sinusoidal. And when we plot these two eigenfunctions, this allows us to see, for example, the dynamics of the system. So in here, we will see that the system, there is an attractor, stable attractor. So the system is moving along this kind of circle in its configuration space. So, so this is kind of the idea of these approximations, of trying to, low-dimensional approximation is trying to determine what try to reduce the number of dimensions of our problem for studying the complex systems. Now, the other thing is that we also, with these eigenfunctions, what we can do is, instead of having, this is the original image, the bottom row of these 6 figures are just given by different timestamps of the system at the original system or the original images, and the top row represents just the approximation using the first 2 eigenfunctions. Yeah, so we will write kind of these images as a linear combination of these two eigenfunctions that I'm plotting here. So with this in mind, then I would like to move into the applications. So I would like then to ask if you have any question in here.
Yeah, I guess a quick question. When you're defining these discrete vector fields,
Yeah.
do you have any theoretical guarantee that they actually approximate smooth vector fields, or because these are kind of defined independently of what a discretization of a smooth vector field might be?
Yeah,
So,
no.
I mean, I guess.
Yeah. No, the idea is that there is no, here is just, it doesn't need to be smooth. So one of the things is that when we were describing this problem is that for this type of systems, or in general, we don't need to have a manifold, right? So we don't need to have something which is smooth necessarily. So that's the idea of having a measure space. So somehow we would like to say that in some cases we don't require that kind of very, rigid structure of us being smooth to still being able to do this comparison between different states. So yeah, no, there's
Right. No, that I get, and that's interesting to be able to do it just starting from the finite measure space M
yeah,
and then going to the tensor product of the vector fields.
yeah,
But my question was kind of on the other direction. If you did start with a smooth structure and you did have a smooth vector field, and then you were discretizing it so that you would
yeah,
then obtain the finite collection of points where you're evaluating that smooth vector field and then extracting the information of just that vector field and using it in your setup. Does that agree with like the
yeah.
usual?
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
So the only issue here, I mean, somehow here the idea is that you need to kind of define. In some cases, if you want to, use these ideas of gradients or something like that, in here might not be possible. I mean, in the sense that you might need these extra conditions to being able to define some kind of a gradient. So, for example, in this case, we were able to do that in here because we usually, in 2 dimensions, you might approximate these these spaces by the sphere with a triangulation. And somehow it's like we are thinking that, but it doesn't matter. We still can define these ways of having vectors there, and still you can define this way of computing the distance between. If you are given this set of information, you still will be able to compute the similarity, say, or the distances between different states just by using this idea of measure spaces. So integrating doesn't require this smoothing. Differentiating is the part where you would need extra structures. But yeah, in this case, they both have to agree this integration using measure or the integration using like the usual differential.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So the applications then, I would like to then start saying something very brief about simulations of soft matter. So basically, as I said, the project that originally I started working in is related to trying to use soft matter to model or to kind of model the dynamics of nanomaterials. But on its own, soft matter will represent challenges to model. Yeah, so for example, they might have, soft matter. Obviously, also we can think about like a tissue and again organisms or like different types of cells and so on. So it also is kind of part of this complex system idea, and And there is a kind of very generic equation that it's very useful in the area of soft matter that might use to for example, describe different processes that soft matter exhibit, like, for example, change of phase transitions, or like bifurcations and so on. So so in this case, this basically, this is called the Ginzburg-Landau equation. And we used this equation on we model a system on a flat domain. And in here, this is a nonlinear system. And but yeah, as I said, this is widely used to model a variety of physical systems, including, for example, liquid crystals, or tissue, or living cells, for example. And well, the energy of these physical states. So basically, sorry, here I just have to say that A is a real function over this domain, over a domain omega. That in this case, we are taking omega for this simulation was taken to be a domain, rectangular domain on R2. And this will depend on parameters alpha and beta. And here will just appears the gradient of this A and so on. So in general, obviously, A will depend on this X and Y, all the position where I am in my domain. So the energy of each of the physical states of this Ginzburg-Landau equation can be modeled in this way. So if I calculate this, then I can have the energy associated to a given solution A at a time t. Yeah. So basically, all these my A's are going to be the states of, for example, a liquid crystal or a, I don't know, tissue or flesh or something. And so here we had these three pairs of parameters alpha and beta. We have three different types of system of behavior. And for example, the A is a very kind of a turbulent. It represents turbulence states. B is something which is not completely turbulent, because if you can see a little bit close there are some kind of spirals appearing in the system. And C is the one which is kind of like the frozen state. It doesn't, the system will not move. Maybe it doesn't look like it changed that much, in some sense. And so we basically we obtain simulations letting the system start with some these parameters and some initial conditions, and then we have like in this case we might have put all the solutions together, and with this will produce kind of video recordings as if we were modeling soft matter that is evolving in time. And the idea was to keep this solution as images and try to apply all this idea of discrete vector fields to see what kind of results we can obtain if we think of the solutions just as grayscale images. So so this is what we obtained. So here is just like a quick a pipeline of what we did. So we have images. Then we obtain this, compute, for example, the L22 distance. Then we obtain a distance matrix. Then we use multidimensional scaling to embed this and see, for example, the trajectories. So that somehow this will allow us to kind of, represent the trajectories of the system in its configuration space. And so what we can see from here is that the system. So sorry, here the color map on the embeddings, on the three-dimensional embeddings, is just time, how it evolves in time. So the system starts in the blue part and ends in the yellow part. So there is some trajectories in here in both the solutions and the gradients of the solutions. And yeah, so somehow this helps us to see that the system somehow it can be described in a way that it follows some trajectories in its configuration space. And so when we now try to compare all the three different type of systems and how it evolves, these states evolve, then we will see that the frozen and the turbulence with the spiral states somehow they give rise to, even though this is a turbulence, the second system is turbulence with spiral, this and the frozen states give rise to a behavior which in somehow there is an idea of like an order or system behaving there in the sense that we can kind of this system somehow might be it's evolving in a way that it's reaching a stable point, and also we can we can reduce the dimension of our problem to, I don't know, maybe a few dimensions. Instead of having, I don't know, 1,000 dimensions, we might reduce to, I don't know, the first 4 or the first 3. And however, in the turbulence case, or the third state, the system still presents like a chaotic behavior in a way that here we, for example, don't see we don't see this nice behavior in the way that it reaches a stable point, but it is oscillating all the time. So it means that this is a chaotic behavior. And the fact that we don't have this low-dimensional representation as which should be seen through very high eigenvalues with respect to and others with a very small eigenvalues, then this means that the system has perhaps, there might be some attractors, but the attractors are very high dimensional. So in this case, we cannot decrease the dimensionality of our system. Somehow this is really very chaotic, whereas these two, even though it's formed by many interactions of many particles, still there is some kind of idea of order in the system. And however, for the chaotic behavior, for short time scales, still we can see some kind of trajectories. Unfortunately, in the global, in large scales, the behavior is still chaotic and high dimensional. And so the other thing that we could do with this is that we were able to obtain through this data analysis the energy as some kind of sum of norms or factors that imply the norm, or that where the norm of the image is included. And this will fit very well with the calculated energy of each of the states. So somehow, like one of my colleagues calculated the energy. On the other hand, we did this analysis with the images, and there is a very nice agreement in this values of the energy. So somehow still we can see that there is information of physical observables that can be recovered just doing this analysis, data analysis of the images of the systems. And this is the state approximation of using just two principal components. So these are in the bottom row, we have the original pictures, and the top row, we have just approximations with two principal components. So as we already have seen, here in before, we have these very high eigenvalues and this very nice kind of behavior, which somehow allow us to say that the system is still, our problem of studying this type of systems can be reduced to say, well, we might only need like a few parameters to describe a system like this. So the second example is just the simulation of a reaction diffusion systems, where basically these are the type of systems that were studied by Turing in his paper of morphogenesis, and which are one of the that I talk about at the beginning of the talk. And these are used to model, again, pattern formation in nature. So there are many types of reaction diffusion systems. So we use one of the simplest one, in which we have involved two types of, say, chemical species or whatever, U and B. And the idea is that the patterns will kind of will arise as a consequence of this change in concentrations of U and B in a given, say, region of space. In this case, we model these equations on a spherical domain. So this is something, so usually when you try to find this kind of systems, these are usually modeled on flat domains. But we try to do in a different type of domain so that we can apply all these tools of, generalizing these vector fields to whatever other type of space. Well, more general spaces than just flat domains. So in here then, so somehow like we have here again, these are part of the four different solutions for two types of systems. So one in which we have stripe formation. Again, sorry. So here, if I change the parameters A and B, these parameters then will give rise to different type of patterns over the domain I'm looking at. So so here changing A and B, and these are just coefficients of diffusion again. So changing these values will give rise to these changes in patterns. So for certain parameters, we might have formation of stripes, and for other parameters, we'll have this more like an oscillatory system. And that basically, this was the oscillatory system is the one that we were more interested in. Because we didn't know exactly how it was what we were going to see if this system, for example, might behave in a very chaotic and random way, and if we were if we could see some kind of same high dimensionality problem than in the case of the turbulence states for the Ginzburg-Landau equation. So when we compare these two systems, so we can see that for the stripe formation, then the system starts evolving in a way that it reaches a stable point, where basically is when the system is already formed all the stripes. So then when we do all these embeddings and we take these eigenvalues and eigenfunctions, then we can see here, for example, that we have mainly one eigenvalue, so we can reduce the dimension of our problem. And then here we have all the eigenfunctions plotted, and all of them kind of converge towards a certain region, a certain point. And for the case of the oscillatory system, then we have the first thing to notice is that we don't have this problem of that we see in the turbulence case. Because here now we really can see that there are a difference there is a gap between the first eigenvalues and the first two eigenvalues and the other one. So that means that we can reduce the dimension of this problem. And when we plot the eigenfunctions, then we can see that there is some kind of periodicity, but it looks more like a chaotic behavior, so the typical kind of behavior of a chaotic system, and where the attractor is low dimensional. So the fact that we have this low dimensionality here and this kind of type of behavior let us suppose that we think of having possibly a low-dimensional chaotic attractor. And when we do these plots, then we obtain basically that precisely that we are able to see this periodic or these orbits. This periodic behavior is observed when we plot the first two principal components or coordinates of the system. And for the oscillating system, and for the case of the stripe, the system starts evolving, and it starts, and from this blue part, it moves in a trajectory, nice defined trajectory, and then it reaches a point where after that the system doesn't move. So it reaches kind of an equilibrium state. So in this case now, we also were able to, similarly than in the case of the approximating images with a few eigenfunction, we were able to do the same for approximating, in this case, for example, the stripes here. I'm just showing the stripe case where we can approximate the shape of these stripes. The original shapes are at the top, and these are the approximations in load, even with only one principal coordinate. And having these results also, we were able to, we would try to, characterize using the theory of the Lyapunov, chaotic theory, the theory of chaos, and trying to see if we could kind of test our model computing the maximal Lyapunov exponent. We were able to do that and using MATLAB. For that, we basically need a time series of the system. For that, we use the first principal coordinate of the system. And the maximal Lyapunov exponent is a way to detect what type of attractor you have in a system. So you might have something which is chaotic, or it's like a periodic. And if the maximal Lyapunov exponent is positive, it tells you that when you look at the trajectories and how fast the trajectories move from each other, it basically tells you that the trajectories are moving very fast, and then this tells you that your system has a chaotic attractor. So in this case, we have we confirm the presence of this chaotic behavior, finding that for lambda is bigger than 0 for whatever these two, the u or the gradient of u for the system. So finally, just quickly, just 2 minutes for that, I would like to say that this was part just of a theoretical study of systems, the widely used systems to model like soft matter, or to model pattern formation or morphogenesis. And we try to obtain results with data which comes from experiments. So for that, this collaboration that we have with our colleagues in the United States, we analyze something which they call molecular fish, schools of molecular fish. So basically, they study liquid crystals, and liquid crystals exhibit properties that will lie between being properties which are more or less like a crystal, in the sense that they might present a preferred alignment along one axis, but also still they have kind of they are also liquid, so somehow it's they are between disordered and disordered state. And so they are like the molecules of the liquid crystal will have a preferred orientation and three-dimensional arrangements that somehow can be modulated by different factors or variables like temperature, electricity, and these properties are the ones that are used to create lots of technological devices like screens and watches and so on. So here, this is kind of the comparison between school of fish And this is the kind of what they call the school of molecular fish, where each of these points basically corresponds to a lot of molecules arranged in a way that they look like this, like donut. So there is kind of a hole in the middle, but all this kind of donut is formed by lots of thousands of, I don't know, of molecules in there, which kind of arrange in a way that have that shape. And here, what we see is that one of these representation is that they themselves have like this kind of vector field in here, where here they have also arrows to say how these molecules might be oriented or in average oriented in this given point on the space. And this is the real experiment. So here, this part, this spot here in the middle is just the size of the school of molecular fish. And these are the results finally. So we have all of these images. These are not simulations. These are real. This is data obtained from optic microscopy. And so we have here in the top row something which just start moving. It looks as if it was moving. These donuts start moving towards the right. And then in the middle row we have movements, but also we have some kind of deformation of these donuts to form this kind of very, what they call fingers, which are bigger structures. And finally, we have this at the bottom. We start with this kind of like these fishes or fish, and then they start kind of like moving away from each other to form these more like islands. And when we studied this, then we see the different behaviors of of the system. So, for example, in here we don't have a complete orbit because the time of the video recording didn't allow us to have the complete that orbit. But we believe that if we might let the system, keep recording, the system will still be living around, moving around this loop. And the other one, we started in the blue, so it seems that this one is describing basically what was happening at the top for some time, and then at certain time, the deformation is making that the system is moving towards, I start kind of decaying towards a point which is kind of will be perhaps a stable point of the system. And so somehow here the system seems to be is losing kind of energy through this deformation of via the shape deformation in this kind of donuts. And this other finally, it looks more like still the system seems to be still not having this periodic behavior, not periodic attractor from the beginning, but yeah, so these are kind of some of the results that we have so far. Still, there are many other things to analyze from the system, as what other physical variables we can obtain from the analysis. But yeah, this is an ongoing project, and I think that it's all what I wanted to say today. And thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Ingrid. Floor is open for questions.
Actually, could you go back to the simulations that you had on the sphere of the reaction diffusion Gray-Scott system? Yeah, maybe that one. Yeah, no, the next one, maybe just a couple. I was just wondering what were your computational resources maybe for the next one. Like, how fine do you need to do the triangulation and the approximation of your vector fields? Just because I guess I still have on the back of my mind that you're approximating a differential system given by the system of differential equations. And then there is some sort of threshold which you need to approximate so that it actually, comes up with this structure. So yeah, okay, maybe that's the first question.
I think, so here this triangulation is obviously not the real one. So it has to be finer than this. Which is more like this one, I think. So you really have lots of triangles in here,
Right.
so that you can really have these nice shapes of stripes and so on. Yeah, so this basically, again, so this is something because we know what the system of equations are, and we have a model already, and we know what we have to solve and so on. But yeah, so in this case, you can have that resolution, but for in general, so the idea is that you don't need to have even like that fine, triangulation, or like your set doesn't need to be that contain even that many, but yeah, some number of elements to still being able to compare different states.
Okay. So I would disagree that you don't need to in general, because it really depends on how much the vector field is kind of oscillating the resolution that you would need to use, and you don't really know that a priori, but that's fine. I mean, you can just set a scale and then work with whatever works at that scale. But the kind of question that I wanted to get to is, what computational resources did you use? Like, can you run this on your laptop, or were you sending it to some server with like a
Yeah,
bunch of
I think so. I mean,
GPUs, or how fast?
yeah,
Because you
so
said you used MATLAB, right?
yeah, so my collaborator, who was she's a PhD student, she's a brilliant PhD student. She did these computations using a software called COMSOL. So this is a very kind of I think standard software for people doing simulations in physics. And I don't think she didn't need to use any special like a computer. So she did her, I think, in her laptop. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Ingrid, I had a question about slide number 23, if you could put that back up. Yeah, is that the Belousov-Zhabotinsky reaction?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So
usually,
yeah. So. Uh-huh.
So usually in that thing you see some spiral patterns, and the tips of the spirals are these singularities, and they rotate around the singularities, sort of creating a more chaotic system. So in your simulations or in your data analysis, do you look at that situation?
I mean, I think we could have done that, but the problem is that we didn't have flat domains. So we didn't have these flat domains, and instead of that, we went for something which is more unusual, which is just trying to see what happens in a sphere. Because in here, for example, as I said, one of the things we wanted to say is that this might be something that perhaps could model something on the Earth, or something on the, like, I don't know, how the brain is formed, or some organism, they are kind of spherical. They are not necessarily flat. But but I guess that, for example, the fact that you have a chaotic thing, I mean, I believe that even if we have a flat domain in here, we still be able to see it in here. Obviously, also depends on the geometry of the domain that we use.
There are chemists that do this thing on a two-sphere, so the BZ reaction.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, these are the conditions that my colleague, that Maria, the PhD student, used, and this is the chaos that she was able to see. Maybe there will be other systems where they are more like easily detectable, these, more chaotic and nice shapes.
Okay. How about some other questions? So if there are no other questions, we'll thank our speaker again. A great talk. Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you very much.